So good evening. Thanks so much for being here. It is absolutely my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. I'm Mary Margaret Zindran, publisher of Architecture Minnesota magazine and executive director of the American Institute of Architects Minnesota chapter. Over the past couple of years, the Walker Art Center and Architecture Minnesota magazine have been establishing a renewed relationship, building on the foundation of past efforts that some of you may have taken advantage of over the years, like the Videotech competition and the architecture-focused lecture series. We are very happy to be working in partnership with the Walker once again. Olga Viso and the team at the Walker have a deep understanding and a genuine appreciation for the power of architecture. Engagement with such high-caliber architects and landscape architects for this expansive effort to unify the Walker campus has surely grown that appreciation. These collaborators include nationally and internationally recognized talent from right here in Minnesota. Joan Serrano and John Cook of HGA, Tom Osland of Osland and Associates, and Julie Snow of Snow Kralik. And of course, our speaker this evening, one of the most respected and multi-talented designers in the world, Petra Blaisse of Inside Outside. In just a few moments, I'm going to turn it over to Olga to introduce Petra. Before I do so, I want to add my own personal note of appreciation for Petra's work on the Wurtele Upper Garden. So, my first extended stay in the newly renovated garden was the afternoon of July 22nd for Rock the Garden. We were 4 of the 11,000 in attendance. We think that's us. And got there early, staking out a prime spot in the long, cool grass. And it was so very welcomed in 90-degree heat. Watching Will Toledo of Car Seat Headrest in his black turtleneck made us all feel woozy in sympathy. So I headed up the hill to fill the family water bottles. As opposed to similar treks in the past, when walking up the hill was an awkward wind through the crowd, I simply followed the path. A clear, solid, accessible, and fun way up. On the way back down the hill, I realized that I was walking a little taller, aware of my place in the crowd. It seemed the same was true for the others walking near me. I realized that this wasn't just a path, it was a promenade. And then during the break, before Benjamin Booker performed, my older daughter saw a spot open up under one of the trees. We raced up the path, feeling only a little bit guilty for hopping over the corners. It was a new tree, small and sprightly, and it did the job. My daughter sent a text from under the shade, "Chillin' on a hot day at the Walker." So thank you, Petra, for helping make a hot day at the Walker one of our family's best summer memories. And on behalf of Architecture Minnesota magazine and the Minnesota Community of Architects, thank you for so thoughtfully and artfully designing this space. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Walker Executive Director Olga Viso to introduce Petra Blaisse.
Well, thank you so much, Mary Margaret. We're so pleased with our collaboration with Architecture Minnesota and AIA Minnesota, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I have the great honors of introducing Petra Blaisse, who is really a brilliant, multifaceted designer based in Amsterdam, who is the founder of the firm Inside Outside. And we have had the pleasure of working very closely with Petra for now a little over 7 years, since 2010. I went back and looked at our first conversations and invited Petra early on to help us reimagine the transformation of this entire 19-acre campus that includes the Walker Art Center and the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden. And she's been a key member of the master planning design team, which has included the architects that Mary Margaret identified and led to the completion that we just opened the entire outdoor grounds this June of the Wurtele Upper Garden, which is the green landscape that surrounds the walker and really envelops and returns the building to the landscape in such an elegant way. This is Petra's design and her collaboration with Joan Serrano and John Cook at HGA around the new entrance, and collaboration also with Tom Osland and Julie Snow with the garden. And really collaboration has been so much at the center of this project, and I think it has led to a really holistic, integrated design approach that transcends really property ownership. We own the 7 acres here on the Walker. The park board owns the 12 acres across the street, but we worked collaboratively to create, I think, a singular experience, a seamless experience for visitors. And we've had already 500,000 visitors on both sides of the grounds since June 10th in the last 90 days. So we're really proud of that. And as I said, Petra was there from the beginning, even before we really had a design brief, before we really knew the ambitions of the whole transformation. And she was brought here along with artists and a number of other designers to do an initial assessment. And she's been a stalwart partner through the master planning process, through the concepting phase, through the fundraising phase, really all the way through to completion. So thank you, Petra. You and your partner, Jana Krepan, who worked very closely on the project, have been there very flexible, very adaptive, and taking advantage of opportunities as they evolved as the project evolved, including at the end being able to narrow Vineland Place to connect and knit the 2 campuses. And also responding to wanting to make the hillside landscape as accessible as possible. And you took sometimes these curveballs of challenges into turning them into really signature design gestures, like the incredible zigzag walkways that mark the hillside landscape and make that elevated landscape fully ADA accessible. It's pure Petra at its best, and I think the other thing that's really pure Petra in this beautiful landscape design is that majestic hill that really defines the landscape. It was a space that is subtle but yet a commanding part of the design that is, I think, what creates the sense of place and defines the experience and everything around it, and it certainly maximizes those views down to the skyline of the city of Minneapolis as well as the Sculpture Garden. So if you've walked that landscape, and if you haven't, I would urge you to do so, and you can observe really everything. It becomes this central kind of fulcrum that's central to the entire campus experience, and is part, I think, of what creates the intimacy and the porosity of inside and outside between interior spaces and exterior spaces. And it is really the magic of what you do, Petra, as a designer who's looking at the entire experience of place, both inside and outside. It defines your practice, and I think it's what it's resolutely about. So Petra's going to be talking about her practice this evening, and she started her career in 1978 at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam in the Department of Applied Arts. And from 1986 on, she worked as a freelance exhibition designer and won distinction for her installations of architectural works. Her focus then shifted to the use of textiles, light, and finishes in interior spaces, as well as the design of garden and landscape. And it was in 1991 that she founded Inside Outside, which also works in multiple creative areas, including textile, landscape, and exhibition design. And she works with a team of about 10 designers that bring different expertises, design expertises to bear in a really collaborative studio and work environment. She's also collaborated with many renowned architects and designers around the world, most notably with OMA. And I first saw Petra's work actually in Seattle, at the Seattle Central Library, which opened in 2004. Signature floor treatments and curtain and landscape, and really introduced this really refined sensibility of integrating inside and out. Also, her curtains at the Casa de Música in Portugal and the Chazen Museum here in Wisconsin are striking sculptural and architectural statements. And Petra's been recognized for really the diversity of her practice. She and Inside Outside were the subject of a solo exhibition in 2000 at the Storefront for Art and Architecture in Soho in New York. She represented the Netherlands in the 13th Architecture Biennial in Venice in 2012. And she's currently working on a number of projects in Europe, the US, and Asia. So please join me in welcoming Petra Blaisse to the stage and back to Minneapolis. Thank you.
Good. Ooh. Is this necessary? This is really strange because I can hardly see you, and that makes speaking to the audience very different. Is it recorded? Ah, that's the reason. Okay, so definitely I'm not working alone. I have here a partner and colleague, Aura Melis, she's an architect, and the whole team at Inside Outside are from different disciplines: architecture, interior, landscape architecture, fashion design, etc., etc. And so we're like 10 to 12 to 14. And yeah, the interest has always been coming from art and exhibition design in the applied arts, but also always having been, but also being of a generation where, of course, modern architecture with very transparent facades is very normal. And so the connection between interior and exterior is very fluid already in the architecture. But I learned in from my teens almost, working at the Stedelijk, but also with photographers and so on, how important light is and how important materials and color and scale is to influence an object or a space. You know, if you want to exhibit an object, whether small or large, transparent or not transparent, what you can do with it, the placement of an object, the lighting of an object, the surrounding of an object, the color, or the small space, large space, highs, dark, light, it influences completely the meaning of that object. And then apart from that, the connection between interior and landscape is very much a personal interest in that subject. And also very interesting to challenge the boundaries of a space, whether a space in a building or whether it's an urban plan. So actually the work really developed into large and small scale. So I'm going to take off because they make a lot of noise. Usually I have a lot of them, it's even worse. So the whole idea of using soft materials and color and living materials like plants, and this time opposition between textile that degrades and plants that grow, and the fact that you always have to work with climate and the human interface is actually what has my interest. So Inside Outside is interested in this fleece between inside and outside, but also using screening and transparencies of different degrees to influence rooms or spaces and connections and communications between different areas. And the scale is very important. We do a lot of theater and public buildings in the sense of interior finishes, but also curtains that mostly have technical necessities. Of course, not this one. This one was actually advertising our show at the storefront. To show the scale in which we work, we covered the whole building at the time. It's a transparent curtain, by the way, made of very simple materials. But so that scale can be enormous, but it could also be small and intimate. It's all about transparencies and see-throughs, and also using surfaces to communicate messages or tradition or culture. You can tell whole stories with curtains and also with gardens, naturally. So that breaking open, sort of claustrophobic urge to break open. And as we are involved many times with architects from the conceptual phase to the building phase, we can also influence a building in the conversation. Like, what would it be if you open that up, or if you sink in this piece, and so you get much more light in the interior. If you plant it, the movement of the grasses or the plants, also the seasons. So that breaking open is also part of our work. In unexpected moments like galleries that have actually closed windows with sunken spaces, why not open it and see that public that passes by gets a connection with your exhibition by chance, which is also a very important ingredient in our work, the effect of chance and effect of change. Light, I already mentioned, essential if you want to influence the experience of spaces. Voyeurism, maybe also part of our work, in the sense of how can you make an unexpected view into a kind of almost secret world, or how can you make an opening so challenging that it gives whatever happens behind a special meaning. Windows, openings in, whether it's a concrete bridge like here in the museum park, or whether it's a concrete parking floor that is broken open by the pressure of the water underneath. You know, Holland is a polder landscape. This is in the heart of that polder landscape, a new piece of city where we were asked to make a garden in between two sunken parking lots, but we opened the roof and we cracked open the floor and we made this kind of half underground garden. Reflection, the effect of reflection making you wonder where things end, where does the interior begin, where does the garden start? Using reflection to introduce new elements. Here, if you have a mirror on the floor, the trees seem to grow downward instead of upward, etc., etc. So reflection as a tool, also in the sense of projection, you know, creating surfaces that absorb light so that they can give you back information. Using the curtain, I'm always talking about the emancipation of the curtain. If you say, oh, I make curtains, people say, oh, very nice. Is it with flowers, or, you know, how large in a window or so? But no, our curtains are emancipating. They are, you know, personalities in themselves, sometimes very restrained, hardly visible, sometimes incredibly present. Here, one of my earliest curtains with a sound system integrated in the curtain. You know, they can just let the architecture go and do their own thing and make their own spaces. And they appear and they disappear, they make noise or they make no noise. They catch your attention or they don't catch your attention. But in any case, they have something to say. And they solve a lot of technical problems, acoustic, light, space, climate, etc. And to make these landscapes and curtains, you have very basic tools like the path and the track. Well, as long as the curtain is not emancipated enough, it needs a track, but maybe one day it won't need a track anymore. But to us, a path and a track is almost the same thing. It choreographs movement, it choreographs the movement of the object, but also of the viewer, how the viewer moves around it or uses the path to walk through a landscape, like Olga and the two speakers before me so wonderfully described, that if you take a path, you have a different experience than if you cut all the corners and go straight through, obviously. So the path is a kind of invitation for different experiences. And it can be very efficient and straight, or it can be very romantically meandering, and you don't need to follow it, but you could follow it. And if you follow it, it takes more time, but you have different perspectives. But a path also shows you the way to entrances or exits or important moments. And a path can be three-dimensional, like here, where it's a shading element that you can follow to be protected from the sun and other elements. Then our interest in materials. What are materials? What do they do? How do they progress? How do they wear and tear? How do they grow? What do they need? What do they want to be or do? Especially in textiles, but also plants. Where do they come from? How can they grow? How do you influence the soil? If it's a textile, how heavy is it? What is its characteristic? How can you use it? Even if it's a piece of cardboard, what can you do with it depending on the scale, the use, the place, etc. Or a piece of stone. If you use it in the right way, you can make a very smooth, soft, sensuous landscape. So that interest in focusing on the material, almost as if you look through a looking glass, through a, I don't know the English word, it's very interesting to learn how to use things and how to combine things, how to use scale but also three-dimensionality for certain effects, even to catch the dirt, or to catch the dust so that it gives it a certain... Especially in theater, you can do many of these kind of tricks to make things from far away look more thick or three-dimensional. So into the detail, basically, and into also the technical part, the muscles behind this elegance. There is, of course, a whole world of technique. We worked here in Minneapolis with ASGA and with Alex, who's here today, and Joan and John. But and Ted, but it's all also about engineering and steel and concrete and machines and motors and cables and tubings, and that's what I call the muscle that nobody sees, but that, of course, is there and that has been all behind the scene. And then the inspiration of weight and weightlessness, very much influenced, if I talk about myself, through modern art and literature and everything naturally, but the weightlessness of things, the influence of draft and wind on things, if you want, if you choose, and that's extremely interesting. So this is for me the epitome of an emancipated curtain. Doesn't need the architecture anymore. It's carried by helium balloons, and it kind of does this. Ooh. And if somebody opens the door, the whole curtain goes. And it was for a concert and a chamber orchestra that moved from theater to theater. And it was a piece called Narcissus by a Greek composer, Kalliope Tsoupaki, a very beautiful, good composer. And she asked me to add something to this chamber orchestra, these performances. And so we made this. And it's flexible in its size, naturally. So weight and weightlessness. Olga was already mentioning, I think, the Seattle Library. And that's one of our almost signature projects in the sense that we worked with OMA. So the office of Rem Koolhaas, but at the time with Joshua Ramus and Dan Wood, and all these teams per projects change all the time. But with OMA, and from the beginning, from the conceptual phase to the end, and that means what I was just saying, that you're very much involved in the whole way you view the building, how it's positioned in the city, what you can do with the little place you have, or space sometimes, for landscape, and how you can enter the building and influence the light, the views, etc. But also, for instance, here to talk to the municipality, as we did here in Minneapolis years and years later, to see if the municipality would accept if the trees that are always one kind of tree along the street, whether they could change at a certain point, all of a sudden, become a different kind of tree. So we asked Seattle municipality if we could make families of trees along the street, all around the building, of oak family, maple family, etc. And they agreed, and that made all of us, a kind of subconscious realization where you are through a very simple intervention. And these kind of conceptual sketches show the architect and the client what we would like to do with this landscape, as it's so minimal. How can you use it at its best to invite people in and to show people the way through the building through carpets, for instance? So actually the landscape is, in this case, a series of carpets with local plantings, and then they change into textile carpets inside, representing plantings, but also playing with the scale to make all the furniture of such a public library where everything needs to be very bulletproof and very safe and very strong, to kind of make everything more elegant. Just through exaggerating the scale of the images, everything looks smaller and more elegant and more weightless. And color. And then entering in the auditorium and making an auditorium that becomes part of the landscape, the chairs part of the landscape, the curtain and the floor. Sometimes we're asked for a so-called art intervention, and this was during the Art Biennale in Venice. We were asked by Francesco Bonami in 2004 to join 8 or 9 other artists to create pavilions in a huge garden, an estate really, in Codroipo, which is outside Venice, and to make a kind of routing through the landscape there, so that people could visit after seeing the exhibition inside, to go outside and enjoy the gardens. And we said, well, we're not architects and we're also not sculptors, so we don't know. Well, we're going to think about what a pavilion in our case then would be. And we thought of something that would really represent what we do or what we like, and that is to make things kind of weightless but also flexible. And so we thought of producing kind of small parasols in the size of a hoe heet een paraplu nou in het Engels? In the size of umbrellas, so that when people were, went through the exhibition and went outside, they would get one of those umbrellas and take it out. And they were actually called rifletuti, and they were parasols, and like sunglasses, they were silver, transparent, but they were protective of the sun. These are all collages for the presentation. In the end, we bought 60 umbrellas, took off the material, the original material, and replaced them with this silver foil, and made them full of holes so that they symbolized these, what we call organized views. So you were in your own pavilion, you could walk around with your own pavilion, you were protected from the sun, you could look through, and you had the reflection of everything around you, but also from a distance you would not be visible because you would look like part of the sky. And we also made stainless steel plates, round, polished, with big pins underneath, and placed them in the forest of this, or in the shady areas of this estate, so that you would have a kind of routing, and you would walk with your rifletuto through the landscape, passing these almost water drops and leading the way and adding a special dimension to the landscape. And all these rifletuti were returned to Inside Outside in Amsterdam, and sometimes they have a second life, and they are here in a gallery, a completely new gallery in Amsterdam. Olga, you should check it out. It's called One Work, in Dutch één werk, and it shows one work of an artist at a time, which I think is a beautiful concept. And it's a building by Barend Koolhaas, a very young architect. Anyway, so then landscape in all kinds of climates. Here in Qatar, in Doha, asked by OMA again to make 2 gardens, one for the National Library and one for the Qatar headquarters, Qatar Foundation headquarters. And here you see a bit, they are both in a new area, relatively new, in Doha called Education City. And it's a city planned by Isozaki, and a lot of different architects make buildings there that all have to do with education. So there are universities and hospitals and faculties and libraries and also, you know, faculties of all kinds and of all disciplines and cultures. Everyone gets together there to learn and to exchange knowledge, which is a beautiful thing. So in the desert, and pretty warm, I can tell you, this National Library designed by OMA was slowly developing. And we were asked to, by OMA first and then by the Qatar Foundation, to implement a curtain inside this library to create an auditorium. So a flexible auditorium, in the sense that if you would open the curtain, the auditorium would be part of the landscape of the library, a huge space. And if it's closed, there's this kind of soft box inside that space. And you can imagine this space a bit. This diagonal beam is something that we thought of in the conceptual phase, that it would be beautiful if a curtain that we didn't know that we were going to make, but someone would make, would really follow the gradation of the chairs of the auditorium, so that it wouldn't be like a kind of pot, but that it would have this shape that would also symbolize the form and the shape of the auditorium chairs. And so it was engineered, it was drawn, it was calculated, and this beam has been made. And then we were invited to make this curtain, and we thought, I thought, in this case, I'm really very stupid, because to make a diagonal curtain is actually counterproductive when you work with textiles, because textiles have to do with gravity, and here you are like this, you know? So how will it hang and how will it behave? Because it also has to shift position. It doesn't hang always in the same way. Has to be stored, and it has to be open and closed, and for maintenance and for uses. And so how do we solve that? In the meantime, we had to, like always, work with engineers and track specialists to make the tracks and the motors, etc. And we were thinking, how can we create a curtain that can go around these corners and then move up like this and then store again back in the horizontal position? And finally, I thought, and we thought, we have to work with the textile museum, textile lab in Tilburg in Holland, because we need to develop a textile that is shifting in itself. It needs to shift in itself, because you can't otherwise solve it. So we have to find a yarn that is so slippery and yet held together that it shifts in position in each different situation. And so finding the yarns, finding the way of weaving, but also in such a way that it doesn't fall apart. So also developing a design, a real design, meaning what is the decoration, what is the color, what is the message, what is the scale, what does the architect like it to be, what does the client like it to be. What works best in this space, what works best in this culture, etc. We came with a kind of structure, a linear structure of both very loose weave and very fast weave, so that it would hold each other in the right position and almost help each other into position. The story of the design is about space, about the stars and the world above the desert at night, and very almost mathematic design. And what we also designed is the way of weaving, because if you weave, you have a front and a back, and sometimes you have a jacquard weave. In Holland, also a very old tradition, damast. So you have a front and back, which is positive, negative. Black is white here, and white is black there, etc. But in this case, we came up with a weave together with the Textile Museum that had 3 layers, which meant that you could hide yarns, which meant you could have 2 sides that were completely different. Not completely different, but the color completely different. So we had one white and silver side with a tiny bit of black, and one completely dark side. And we managed to also make a gradation from blue to black and back to blue. Then you had the design of the verticals that held this very loose weave together. And then I thought, when I looked at it, it looks like a men's shirt, you know. It's, I mean, if you're near, it looks okay, but far away, it's, you know, the space is so large, it's too flimsy. So we need something large. And so we went and thought and were inspired by these astrolabia, we call it, measuring tools for, wat zijn hemellichamen? Well, astrolabia, astrology, measuring the stars and the... Sorry, my English sometimes loses me. Anyway, so we photographed them and we redrew them in a graphic way, and we used those as part of the design. And that's a very political discussion with, you know, the clients and the users, etc., what this curtain communicates and how you do it. And should it be language, because it's a library? Should it be poetry? Should it be religious? Should it be this or that? No, none of it. And this was, or should it be maybe a connection to the garden that we also designed? None of that. This was appreciated. Making models to see exactly where and how the corners, the openings, the slits, but also realizing that if you weave a cloth, you just have lengths of cloth, but you don't have a curtain. So we had to weave in horizontal direction, and so we had to connect all these bands of cloth together in a horizontal manner. Calculating each piece and putting it onto computers, translating it to the Weave Machine computer, which is a totally different program, so checking everything, and then weaving and then treating it for fire retardants, because the yarn itself was not in itself fire retardant. So it went into moist bath with a salt kind of chemical liquid to make it fire retardant. And we discovered that the whole cloth sucked up this moisture, and when it dried, it was like a mountain landscape. Looked terrible. And then we thought, what to do? We have to stretch it. And the Textile Museum said, fine, we'll make frames. We dry it in frames. It'll stretch and it will remain flat. And it worked really well. It was perfect. But frames, you know how many? Their whole attic was full of frames with our product in it. Then it's rolled up and put in crates, and then the cloth goes to the production company in Germany that has to connect all these bands. And we are the ones to draw all the recipes, how and what and where. And they make tests, mock-ups, one-to-one. They go all the way to Qatar. We hang it on place and see. Of course, it had to have doors emergency exits, etc. And then you can see what is, what can be improved. Here we are at the production company. They are putting it together. The last checks of all the details, where things could have gone wrong, little things that could be improved or repaired. And then it's transported and installed, and we are always there. So we're installing. And these are the last images I have, but there will be other images later. So we are hanging it, and hanging means at least 1.5 weeks of work, because you have to hang it completely measured on each carrier with the right distance and with the scaffoldings and muscle and brain. Otherwise something doesn't go right. Yeah. And that's always really exciting, because it went from a little piece of paper through so many movements, actually like our garden, And then all of a sudden it's there. So this is not yet seamed, but at least positioned in the space itself. And then you go out, and then there is the garden that we also designed under the folding facade, or folding shape of the building, but also outside, circular indentations with a family of acacia and a family of agave in this very dry but fast-growing city. And not far from there, we created a totally different garden, not full soil like the National Library, but on the plate, on the roof of a parking lot. And this is a model by OMA of this Qatar Foundation headquarters. On the top floor, there's Sheikh Hamoza's office, and they are representing Qatarian culture. And here we were asked to create a garden on top of a plate that forms the roof of the parking, as I said. And it was very difficult decision, but to create really a garden made out of planters, because there is nothing else, so you have to build up space to put plants. And very soon our decision was to represent the national plants, the local desert plants. And we did a lot of research and went to the university and met specialists and read their books, and we discovered that the Qatarian desert has 14, 15 plant communities in the desert. So the desert is not just sand, as a Northern European might think. It has plants and animals, naturally, but also plant communities, and they vary depending on the wind, on the salt, on the topography, and on the animals in their neighborhood. So we planned, and we did, represent these 15 plant communities in these planters. So we created planters that were from large to small, from high to low, and also with a varying irrigation system. So from one corner more water, and then to the other corner no water at all, because you have water limitations there, instead of spreading it evenly, to do it as a gradation. And then in the larger, higher planters, or in the large planters, the whole community would be represented. But as the planters grow smaller, you would take out one of the community, and in the smallest there would be only one of the community. So with the university and the foundation, we thought it would be an experimental garden that would be used by the university and by ecologists and botanists to really see what happens if you almost transplant natural plant combinations into an urban situation and maintain them. Is this good or bad? How do they behave if you thin them and if you take care of them, etc. So that's the plan, that this garden will be adopted by the city and its university and botanists and horticulturalists, etc., etc. And in that plain with all these planters, we don't have only planters, but also in the same rhythm, openings that go down into the parking lot and that create openings for fresh air and draft so that there is freshness in the parking, but also gardens in the parking with trees that grow out of the roof. And we had to look in a very early stage for nurseries to grow all these plants, because you're not allowed to just go into the desert and take, pieces of plants or shrubs, seeds, nothing. It's all very, very protected. So it was an enormous process to organize to get all these plants, even import them, strangely enough, to make it a complete collection. Meanwhile, the building develops and the garden is being prepared. Garden, yes, and the planters, of course, not just innocent buckets, but actually housing everything necessary for that landscape. So it has openings for air intake and air exhaust from the parking. It has lighting, it has integrated drainage and irrigation, that's natural, but it also has integrated waste paper basket or trash bins, if you like. And so it's a whole construction made with the architects and engineers so that it would really work and be a self-containing system. And the whole plate and also the planters were, as in the interior, covered in travertin, which is a sandstone, you can choose many different colors, but in a very warm color. That continues in the interior, and that also forms the driveway to enter and to come near to the building. So it's been developed and it's been made. And it's all, of course, in response to the building and in response to the mentality of the city and of the country, of the pride of their national and local richnesses, which is also planting. And what is really beautiful to see is that as soon as you plant it, animals come, insects and birds. And we got pictures from the building site, from the contractor that did the landscape, with pride showing nests in our very young trees. Really fantastic. And this is very important in that kind of climate, and you might know, but I had to learn each time again, is that the evening is the moment to go into the garden, not the day. The day is 9 months unbearable. 4 months, okay. 3 months, okay. And so the evening is it. So you have to really realize to create this atmosphere of inviting and sitting and relaxing and taking your children after 9 o'clock. 4 minutes to go? Gee. Well, maybe one more, and then I need to skip a lot of projects because I can speak for 3 hours and I'm never really disciplined enough to do it condensed enough. This was also, let's say, an artistic intervention invitation to do in a museum house, as we call it, from in Rotterdam, owned by the Dutch Architecture Institute, and they ask each 6 months to an artist to do an intervention in this museum house. So normally it is open for public, you can visit it, and it's a building of the 1933 by Brinkmann and van der Vlucht, Dutch architects from the movement called Het Nieuwe Bouwen. And Het Nieuwe Bouwen's mentality was, in that time of thick walls and brick and small windows and everything new, open, air and space. And so everything is light and everything is thin. And the daylight can come in, but also hygiene and influenced by America, machines in the kitchen, emancipation of the housewife, etc. And so you visit it, and it's a beautiful space, but it pretends to be lived in, and it pretends the family was just there and went for a walk, but actually they are not there. And so it has a very double kind of voyeurism meaning. And the director of the Architecture Institute said, you know, Petra, you can do anything. You can take away the curtains, make new curtains, you can make new carpets, you can refurbish the whole thing, as long as the curators agree, because it's all museum-owned objects. And I thought, well, no, because our work is not about making products. Our work is reacting to architecture or to the context. So why don't we open the windows, first of all, and look out? And why don't we exaggerate this mentality of light, air, and space? Why don't we exacerbate this whole effect? And why don't we cover the floors with mirror? This was a presentation collage, and so was this. And yes, they thought it was a great idea, and these blue areas were the ones that we wanted to cover. Not all rooms, because you have bedrooms and bathrooms and toilets and, you know, all kinds of things, but certain bedrooms of the children we wanted to keep as they were, so that you could really see the difference. And we did, and we were meticulous about it. They are not real mirrors, and it's not steel, it's, you know, it's this PVC plates and covered with a very thin layer of mirroring material. But we were meticulous in the covering of everything, even under the heating and around each pipe and under the wash basin, everywhere. And what happened was that it became a total confrontation also with the whole idea of a museum house, because you saw everything from underneath. You saw that every object had security systems and threads and alarm bells, and they had stickers of, you know, being loaned to other museums in another piece of the world. And so, and of course, we all walked like this, and we were all saying, hey. So that was fun too. And objects that hang, like curtains, all of a sudden were standing straight up and looked like construction. So it did a lot of things, and also giving unexpected light effects and, yeah, kind of catching attention from the street. Like, what is going on here? And also, after a while, deforming and making this very strict and straight architecture in a sort of Gaudi architecture, which we thought was fun. So I'm going to go to the last, because do you mind if I switch really very fast? Olga, this is for an exhibition at the Pompidou in Paris. We were supporting with curtains Pierre Paulin's exhibition and creating this atmosphere from the 50s to the 60s, 70s with a curtain. I'm going really quick. I'm sorry. It's very frustrating, I know. This is a landscape in Amsterdam for a faculty, lots of buildings, connecting them with the landscape with very simple tools, just creating ribbons with bricks that are used in the street, but just using them differently. And by making these ribbons, creating places with plants for seatings, thousands of students, many different faculties, really bound together with this design of flow. And they hired this machine to make photographs. I'm not saying the word. I hate the word. And then the students come, and there are thousands, and they're really inhabiting it, like here. And you keep your breath because you hope everything will be fine. We also made a curtain for the Chazen Museum, and it was very much inspired by the architecture of Machado Silvetti. They had all these shapes in the materials, in the ceiling, in the floor, and we kind of exaggerated that mathematic language in a curtain that needed to give atmosphere but also a privacy to the entrance lobby of the new parts of the museum by Machado Silvetti architects. And so we created something very mathematic, but in a soft material, so that, in fact, this very mathematic drawing kind of became different and three-dimensional. Also designing the track, but with the track, because the building was already nearly done, so there was not a question of integration in any way, but a track put onto the ceiling, and integrating a lamp so that we could use the curtain also as a lighting element. Here the curtain is unwrapped, then hung, then you start to see these layers and these effects. And it was really considered as an art piece, so it's really a part of the collection. And you get these unexpected effects of mirrors or reflections that you don't know if you make it. So I will show you a little film. Thank you very much.